Welcome everybody to November's edition of Chamber Chat. Real excited to be with you today, and we're real excited to have State Representative Emily Virgin, who represents House District 44 with us. Just a little bit about her. She is our most senior member of our Norman delegation, but in chronological age, she's actually the youngest member of our delegation. She has served us very well for 5 terms now. She's in the middle of her 5th term and will be running, or I assume she's going to be running for her 6th and final term this next year. So
yeah, I can make my official announcement right here.
There you go. Breaking news. This is great.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So first off, just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you came from and how you got here.
Yeah, so, I always am not quite sure whether to say I'm from Norman or I'm from Noble, because I think I'm from both. My parents always lived in Norman, still live in the same place where I grew up, but we were in the Noble School District. So I went to Noble schools, graduated from Noble High School, go Bears, and but then went to OU for undergrad and law school. So, I'm kind of a mixture of the two, and I really liked having that smaller school experience. I think it served me well in the legislature, even though I represent a large school district. I also know what it's like to go to and the unique issues that smaller districts face as well. So I ran for office during my first year of law school. I got elected during my 2nd year of law school, which seems like a lifetime ago now. But it's been a great experience, and I can't say that it has been necessarily what I thought it would be, but it has been a great. It's been an honor to represent this district and to represent Norman. But I always tell people it was sort of in my blood to get involved in politics in one way or another. My dad actually was elected to the Norman City Council, the Moore City Council when he was 19 years old. And so he got a pretty early start and didn't run for anything after that, probably smart of him. And then my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a county commissioner in Cleveland County for 22 years. And so I grew up working on his campaigns, and the first time that he ran, I was 4 years old. So definitely grew up around it, and it made things accessible to me. I knew how to, run a campaign. I knew that at the local level, you go knock on people's doors and you ask them to vote for you. And sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. But it's, like I said, it's been an honor and it's been a great experience so far.
So you've got public service in your blood, clearly, and let's not forget your brother also.
Oh,
right?
Let's just forget him. Yeah, no, he's my older brother, so there's a little bit of picking on each other.
You got there before he did, though.
That's what I like to remind people, is that I was an elected official before he was.
Amen. I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about those expectations. You mentioned, you had a certain expectation going into it.
Yeah.
How has that played out? What's that looked like for you?
Yeah. Well, I think you go into it, especially your first term, thinking these are the bills that I'm going to introduce, these are the laws that I'm going to get passed. And the reality of it is, as you know, it takes quite a while for things to actually happen. You work on an issue for years before anything may actually come to fruition. So that's one thing that has been sort of surprising to me. But at the state level, it's so much different than what we see in Washington, and I think that's not something that people realize a lot. I thought going into it, that it was going to be a lot more partisan than it actually is. But I've been able to have friends and relationships on both sides of the aisle, and the fact that I think we get along so much better than it seems people do in Washington leads most of the time to a better product and leads to more compromise. And so I think that has been something that has pleasantly surprised me.
Good. So now, what is it? I guess nine and a half years.
Yeah.
You've got one session left in your 5th term, and then that final term, as we talked about before. How have you seen things change at the Capitol in the time?
Yeah, I think things have changed a lot, especially in the last few years. I think as a legislative body, we have moderated a lot. In 2010, when I first came in, things were sort of controlled by people on the fringes, and you experienced that, and I know we're very frustrated by that. Yeah. So, after you left, things got better.
Wow, thanks.
But it really has, I think, the body has moderated, which is a good thing. It's led us to be able to have some movement on things like criminal justice reform and education funding, because we've been able to come together with both sides of the aisle and accomplish things.
So let's talk about some of those issues, because and there's some really big issues you guys have tackled the last few years, which I think everybody should be really proud of. Education.
Yeah.
When I was leaving, it was right before all the special sessions and things, but talk to us about what's happened in the last couple of years in education reform and funding in particular.
Right, yeah, so funding has been the big issue for us, and I think, when you talk about how we want to change things in the system, that's all well and good, but the fact of the matter is we've underfunded education for a very long time in the state. Both parties have. And so getting us to a point where we have teachers who are able to stay in the classroom, and we have classroom sizes that are sustainable and conducive to learning. That's been our goal, and we've taken a couple of big steps in that direction. I say, the work on education is never done, because when you look at teacher pay, Texas is constantly increasing, Arkansas the same, so we're always going to have to keep up with the states that can steal our teachers away. But we have, over the past 2 sessions, given an average of, I think, just over $7,000 in teacher pay raises. And we have increased classroom funding. I think the classroom funding issue will be what we focus on this session in terms of education, because we still see that per pupil expenditure number not quite keeping up with where we would like to be. And we still see, even in great districts like Norman, we see class sizes that are larger than we would like them to be. We see counselors who are still sort of saddled with all of these other duties. They don't get to actually address the social and emotional needs of the kids. And, we see that we still don't have these areas that we would like to in terms of art and music and these things that really enrich an experience for a child.
So common education is so important, and I got to applaud you and the rest of your colleagues for doing such significant work these last few years. I mean, it's just awesome.
Yeah.
But higher education, here you are, you're really lucky to represent,
absolutely,
I think in our opinion, the university, the state's flagship university, right? So talk to us about higher education, what that looks like for them, maybe this coming session, but in particular OU, what are we going to see out there at the legislature this year?
Well, for the past 8 to 10 years, all higher ed has seen were cuts, and probably the biggest cuts in terms of any state agency of that size. We saw some smaller state agencies that had 40% cuts, but in terms of a large state agency, higher ed took some pretty steep cuts, and I think we sort of felt those cuts here in Norman. Students felt those cuts with tuition going up and fees, and our faculty and staff with essentially hiring freezes and not being able to see raises. So this last session, we did finally provide an increase to higher ed funding, which is very important, not just at OU, but for especially those smaller regional universities across the state where so many Norman kids end up going. They were feeling it probably worse than OU was.
Right.
And so I think we will continue down that path in terms of making sure that tuition remains low. That's something that we're very proud of at OU, that it's an affordable university, but we want to make sure it stays that way. And in terms of attracting the best faculty and staff that we can. That's something that I think OU in particular was very concerned about, was making sure that those faculty and staff members got a raise. in terms of, just trying to keep them here. And same problem that we've got in Common Ed. We're constantly fighting off other institutions trying to come in and take our best instructors. So I think that will be a conversation that continues as well.
So just this month, we've seen the kind of finality of months and months of work in regards to criminal justice reform. And I think a lot here again to be proud of and to applaud all of our legislators, the governor and others who have really led on this issue. Talk to us about that issue, and then maybe are there things that will be happening in addition to what you've already accomplished, whether it be at the ballot, those state questions that kind of started the ball rolling here, the policies you guys passed this last session. Are there things that will be happening in the coming session?
I think so. I think we mostly know that this conversation can't be over with the big steps that we've taken recently. We still have a lot of people who are in our prison system who probably are not a threat to society and were put in under very extreme sentences that maybe have been rehabilitated or have served their time. And we need to focus on getting those folks out as well. But the most important thing that I think we can focus on is making sure that people don't end up in this situation. And that comes in terms of mental health and substance abuse funding. That's something that, again, as a state, we really haven't ever funded adequately. And so it makes sense, right? That if someone has access to services from the beginning, then hopefully they won't interact with the criminal justice system because of a mental health issue or because of a substance abuse issue. We can get them the help that they need, much like our drug court system in Cleveland County, but hopefully catching those people before they ever get charged with a crime. And so moving that service up to really prevent those people from ever being charged with a crime. But also making sure that people aren't saddled with fines and fees that they just can't afford. That's a big conversation that's happening right now, and I think you'll see some legislation in the next session dealing with that issue. We, as a state, have a duty to fund our public safety, all our district attorneys, our sheriff's offices, our district courts, all of those things. We unfortunately, though, have shifted most of the burden of funding those entities onto people who are charged with crimes. Most of them who cannot afford it, and it may lead to this vicious cycle of continually interacting with the criminal justice system. So as a state, I think we need to take the big step of making sure that we're adequately funding public safety from the state and not asking those people who really can't afford it to fund the system.
You brought up, I think, a really unique dynamic between our justice system, but also mental health.
Right.
And there really is a crossover there. Norman's very lucky to have Griffin Memorial Hospital within our community. What do you see happening in mental health in the future?
Well, I think Norman is seen as a leader in in mental health, in treatment and in prevention. So I think that will continue, and I think we have some big opportunities that you worked on when you were in the legislature, and that I think we'll continue to work on to expand services, not just at Griffin, but at other locations in Norman as well. With the Porter campus of Norman Regional Hospital potentially closing, that would be a great area for expanded mental health services, but the funding has to be there. And so that's the question, as it always is with things at the state level. And so I think we have a great opportunity there to expand services and continue Norman's reputation as a leader in that area. But again, it will come down to, how are we going to pay for that?
Gotcha. So last year, and frankly, probably the last 2 years, education's been top. It's not going away, I realize, as you mentioned earlier, but there is another issue out there that I think is probably going to get a ton of attention this next session. It's healthcare.
Right.
Talk to us about that. Clearly, there's a initiative petition that's passed, and or they've collected enough signatures, so that'll be on the ballot. The governor is saying that he's going to come with a proposal, I guess, to the legislature next spring. Where do you foresee healthcare going?
Yeah. It will certainly be the topic. I think, this session. I mean, as you said, education is continually going to be a conversation, but in terms of the big issue of the legislative session, I think it's going to be healthcare this year. And it really is because of the state question. I think people are realizing that that elected officials are realizing that the voters really want something done on this issue, especially those rural voters who are seeing their hospitals close, or seeing them declare bankruptcy, or they've got to drive 100 miles to deliver a baby. It's simply getting to an unsustainable point. And that's not even mentioning, the complete lack of mental health and substance abuse services in many of those communities. And so it's a bigger issue than just Medicaid expansion, but that is an important piece of it. So the state question, I think, will be on the ballot. They're in the process of counting the signatures, but they got plenty of signatures, the most in state history. And so I think it's safe to say that that will be on the ballot next year. Which ballot, we don't know yet. But I think efforts this session will be taken to maybe head off that state question and have voters see what the legislature has done as an alternative to passing the state question. I don't actually see that happening. I know that there are a lot of legislators who will say, well, we've got to get something done. Frankly, I think it's too little too late. We had an opportunity, I think, last session to make something happen in terms of Medicaid expansion. And I know that a lot of people want a unique Oklahoma plan, and that is completely understandable. And I think the administration at the federal level and the national agencies that deal with Medicaid and Medicare, they're willing to work with states to find a way to make this program work. Financially and for any unique circumstances that a state might have, but we really didn't take advantage of that opportunity in the last session. I think because of some disagreements on the policy, whether it was going to involve managed care, which is something that is always talked about at the Capitol, whether it was going to involve work requirements. All of these, things that go along with how you're actually going to get this policy passed. And so, then you have a state question that comes along and is sort of, the whole kit and caboodle in terms of Medicaid expansion. The legislature will have to figure out how to fund that and the specifics of implementing it. But right now, I think Medicaid expansion is very popular in Oklahoma, and I see that state question as having a great chance of success. It, of course, will depend on what the legislature does this session, but I think, unfortunately, on the healthcare issue specifically, people have sort of lost trust in Oklahoma politicians in terms of taking care of that issue because we've let it linger out there for 10 years now.
So tons of big issues are going to be on the table, and that's really the nature of the work.
Yeah.
As soon as you think you've got something solved, you come back in the springtime and know there's another long list of very serious, heavy topics to be dealt with. But you're in a really unique position, and I, to be honest with you, I saw this coming early on after you got up there, that you were primed and ready to take on a huge leadership role, and now you're the minority leader in the House. You have been for a while, but share with us what that's like. I mean, you have a 24-member caucus that you have to corral. You have to make sure that they're on the same page, and you clearly are wanting to put forth good ideas and good solutions, and not just be loyal opposition, but actually bring forth solutions for the challenges the state has. But share with us what that's like to be the minority leader. Yeah,
so it's been right at a year now that I've been in that position, and it's a lot more wrangling personalities than I think a lot of people would think, because you've got members who are representing different districts, and as politicians we all think that we have the best ideas, and we know what's best. It takes a certain amount of ego to run for office, so
Sure.
wrangling 24 egos is not always the easiest thing to do, but it's important work, and I'm glad to do it. And I think you hit the nail on the head that I see myself as having two distinct roles. One is to make sure that all voices are being heard at the Capitol. So those people who don't necessarily have a voice in the process, that may not be able to afford a lobbyist or just are being left out for whatever reason, that we bring that voice to the table and make sure that all sides of an issue are being considered. And I know that that probably gets annoying to the majority party at times. Scott's like, yeah, it does.
Never.
But I think any minority party plays a very important role. Mm-hmm. But also, we can't just be a party or a caucus that is saying no all the time. We have to come to the table with solutions. Whether the majority party wants to listen to those solutions is one thing, but we have to be able to say, if we're not for something, here's our alternative. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've really been focused on this past year, and will continue to focus on, that we don't want to be obstructionists. We don't want to be the party of no. We want to say, here are our solutions. They may look different than what the majority party is proposing, but we want to be a solutions-oriented caucus. And I think all 24 members are bought into that and want to make sure that we're doing that going forward.
So as you approach, ending your fifth term and being up there for nearly 10 years now, how have you seen the demographics change over
Mm-hmm.
those times? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating to me to see districts change, rural and urban,
Right.
and I know a lot of time people think there's this angst, and you said it earlier, that no, we really get along
Mm-hmm.
better.
Mm-hmm.
We may not agree on everything, but so it's not just a partisan divide all the time.
Right.
There's a lot of other things that cause division up there, but how have you seen that ebb and flow?
Yeah, so the rural-urban divide is always something that is going to be present in Oklahoma, just because of how our state looks and how where our population centers are. I think it's shifting a little bit more towards the urban population centers, and I think that probably will continue when it comes to redistricting in 2021. So urban areas may have a few more members than the rural members, but I think Oklahoma is always going to be a state that respects industries and ways of life that we have in rural parts of our state, and we want to make sure that we don't forget that and that we protect that for those folks who depend on farming and ranching and oil and gas and all of these things for their livelihood and for their families and for their schools. So there's always going to be that divide. But I think in terms of the legislature as a whole, I think the body has gotten a lot younger. I think you're seeing younger people run for office and see that as something that's more accessible to them. We have more women now than we ever have had before. And I think that's a very important part of the conversation, because women bring, not just different issues, but a different negotiating style, a different governing style, and one that is very important, I think, for productivity of the entire body. So those are the two main things that I see. But because of term limits, we've seen a lot of turnover. We've got 70-something members right now who are in their first or second term. And so the vast majority of legislators have 4 years or less experience. And that's sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing. But what it has brought, I think, to the body is you've got a lot of fresh pairs of eyes looking at issues and saying, we've always done it this way, but should we do it this way? And those are important questions to ask. I mean, you've got to have that balance of institutional knowledge, knowing why we do things a certain way, but also the question of, is this the best way to do it? And so, as someone in their, fifth term, you look at someone in in their first term and you're like, you have no idea what we've been through or what,
Right.
but it's important to listen to that perspective and to challenge yourself into thinking, well, just because we've, maybe holding on to this grudge in the past, or maybe we just haven't taken a tough look at an issue in a long time. So that's some of the positive that I've seen of not just members who are young in age, but also young in experience.
So as we wrap up our conversation today, I think public service is still one of the noblest things you can do. I think it's just wonderful. What would you say to somebody, regardless of their age or whatever, who may be thinking about entering the arena?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
I would say go for it. I mean, it has been such an honor and an incredible experience for me, because in this job, in public service, you have the opportunity to really affect people's lives and to really affect change, and just helping someone with very simple issues that they may not be able to take care of by themselves, because the person to call, or which button to push, whatever it is. That's an incredible feeling, and it's so fulfilling. And that's something that, whatever I do after I am kicked out of the legislature, I know that I want to be continue in public service in some arena, whether it's elected office or nonprofit work or whatever it is. That feeling of truly helping people and making a difference in their lives is second to none, as you know. And so it's not a profession where you're going to go and make a ton of money. But in terms of personal fulfillment, I can't think of anything better. And so, it's a tough arena sometimes to break into, but I think Norman is one of those places that is always going to be excited about new people who are wanting to be active and helpful. And so get involved in your neighborhood association, get involved at the city level, whatever it might be. And my door is always open to people who are thinking about getting into this arena, because I can't stress enough how much we need people who are dedicated to their communities running for office, how much we need women to step up and run for office. And so those are passions of mine that will continue for a long time.
I can't think of a better way to end up this Chamber Chat.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us this month, in the month of November, for Chamber Chat. And more importantly, thank you for serving House District 44. Particularly in your role, you impact the entire state, being the leader of the minority party in the House. So thank you for that. I treasure our friendship.
Likewise.
It's great,
Yeah.
and really look forward to.
It's better now that you're not in the legislature.
Well, I feel like we get along regardless, so it's good.
We do.
It's good.
Yes.
The Chamber looks forward to partnering with you this next session and moving forward. So we're excited about it.
Thanks.
So thank you very much. Thanks everybody for tuning in this month to November's Chamber Chat. We appreciate Representative Virgin for her service and for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we look forward to seeing you real soon. Thank you.